Now let's start by looking at the arguments for Title IX. Title IX provides no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefit of, or be subject to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Keep that last few words in mind because federal financial assistance is actually a very important point in this case. 2 years after Title IX became law in 1972, Congress passed the Javits Amendment, which directed the then Department of Health, Education, and Welfare to promptly issue regulations implementing the provisions of Title IX with respect to the prohibition of sex discrimination. The amendment further specified that the regulations shall include, with respect to athletic activities, reasonable provisions considering the nature of particular sports. In 1975, HEW promulgated comprehensive regulations requiring that schools provide equal athletic opportunities for members of both sexes and authorizing separate teams for members of each sex where selection of such teams is based upon competitive skill or the activity involved is a contact sport. So the claims in this case are not so much a violation of federal law, but of federal regulation. That too is important since federal regulations are not the supreme law of the land. The term sex in Title IX, the Javits Amendment, and the Title IX regulations cannot plausibly be interpreted to refer to anything other than biological sex. The ordinary meaning of the term sex at the time of the enactment in the 1970s was biological sex and not gender identity, particularly in the sports context. The phrase biological sex is redundant. After all, sex is defined as either of the two major forms of individuals that occur in many species and that are distinguished respectively as female or male, especially on the basis of their reproductive organs and structures. Since sex is determined by the biology of the individual, biological sex is, as I said, redundant. In addition, Title IX regulations allowed separate sports teams precisely because of the inherent physical differences between biological men and biological women. So the question isn't about the separation of sports teams based on sex, but apparently the definition of sex itself. While BPJ agrees that Title IX permits schools to maintain separate female and male teams and to prohibit most biological males from playing on women's and girls' teams, BPJ argues that schools must make an exception to that general rule for biological males who identify as female and have taken puberty blockers or hormones. Apparently, BPJ believes that male and female are defined at puberty, not conception. What else would make males who have taken puberty blockers be considered female? Is that supposed to be the law? But the text of Title IX, the Javits Amendment, and the Title IX regulations do not support that argument and do not speak to that issue in a way that could properly be interpreted to require schools to allow biological males to participate in women's and girls' sports. BPJ argues that if the regulation authorizes a school to limit female sports to biological females without exception, then the regulations are not reasonable as required by the Javits Amendment. Is it reasonable to allow males to participate in female sports? That is the real question. As Justice Kavanaugh wrote in the majority opinion, the court concludes that separate sports teams for biological males and biological females are reasonable given the inherent physical differences between the sexes. In assessing the reasonableness of the regulations, the court must recognize the distinctiveness of competitive sports and the safety and competitive fairness issues that can arise when females are forced to compete against males. You know what is unreasonable? BPJ's other Title IX assertion. BPJ contends that the school's policy violates Title IX because the policy effectively excludes BPJ from entity competitive sports teams at the school. No one that I'm aware of is prohibiting BPJ from all competitive sports, only sports for which he is not qualified, as the court pointed out. While it is an unhappy occasion whenever a student who wants to play sports cannot do so, the Title IX regulations guarantee only equal athletic opportunity. Title IX does not guarantee you a spot on a team, only equal athletic opportunity.